Hey, fellow G&Ders, those who are like our spirituality with a twist. Daniel's fucking with me again with this as he
Yeah.
enjoys to do it
Always,
every time.
always, always, always.
Big ass shit eating grin on your face.
For sure.
I can't hold it together, especially for this one because we're supposed to do these episodes on attachment theory, but we're not going to do them.
No, not today.
And it was really kind of like what Daniel loves especially much. We're just going to improv this shit out
Yeah, for sure.
on something that we were talking about, which was basically the question of what's the status of spirituality in the culture, and did it kind of like die off?
Yes.
This is a little bit triggered by a conversation with another one of our mutual cohort of people, our kind of Sangha, anthropologist friend and TCM, Chinese medical person, Ryan Davenport. We were having a
Yeah.
discussion about this and saying, did something change in the culture where spirituality started to fade away? And what would be the reasons why? And Daniel was like, fuck it, that's what we're recording.
That's it.
But
That's
before
it
we get
right
to the
there.
main out of the interview, I'm supposed to do, or not the interview, the conversation, I'm supposed to do this, which is do us a solid and help our beautiful little Gin and Tantra podcast try to deal with the evil algorithm, the
Yes.
demiurge of the algorithm that's trying to keep us all enchained,
That's right.
right? And blinded. Um, and to help, like, really what we're trying to do is to build our, I don't know, digital sangha or something, to
Yeah.
build digital
Yeah.
online spiritual community.
Yeah.
That's our goal. So if you can do the things that everyone always asks you to do, which would be the likings and the subscribings and give a little shout out to us, that would be greatly appreciated because it does
Yeah.
help overcome the evil algorithm.
Yes. That's right.
Yeah. All right. So cool. So how this happened was I'll set it up and then you were
Yeah.
right. We're about ready to like release
The
the Kraken
demons.
on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyways, we were talking and I was just saying, I don't know. I was talking with this anthropologist, um, wonderful person, Ryan Davenport, and future episodes to be coming with him. Probably will like start picking his brain about some things. But
Yeah.
this was just he and I chatting, and I said,
Yeah.
there's something where spirituality and the culture just started to die away. And what really hit me was I'm listening to this audiobook from Ram Dass, and I'm enjoying it. He's talking about the Bhagavad Gita and kind of giving his takes on different parts of it. And I just had the moment where I was like, I think if this guy came out now, no one would give a fuck. No one would care. It's just like he's a recognized name, so people still
Yeah.
kind of pay attention. But like if he really came out now talking same material, same ideas, same things, no one would give a flying fuck.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking of other people like this, like an Alan Watts, right?
Mhm.
And I thought, God, he wouldn't make it either. Like there was no way that like his message would get out, Now because he's a known commodity from a previous time, name recognition and these kinds of things, his
Yeah.
ideas out there.
Mm.
And I was wondering, so what happened? And probably, in talking with Ryan about this, and I wanted to get his opinion as sort of a social scientist.
Yeah.
And it was sort of the idea that spirituality started to like fade away. And then we're
Mm.
trying to figure out when this happened. It came up a little bit, funnily enough, just to give a shout out to an old interview in our Robert Thurman interview too.
Sure.
We talked about it a little bit with him.
Yeah.
Like almost like 2000, the aughts, something started to happen. Anyways, that's the setup.
Hmm.
Daniel was like, hit record. I have some stuff I want to say about this. So this is the episode. So I'll throw it back to you, Daniel, with that. gave the context thing. Now I'm
Yeah.
interested in what you had to say.
Yeah. So it's an interesting topic, which is why I wanted to bring it up, for a number of reasons. One, I mean, this is Jin and Tantra spirituality with a twist, right? And so we talk about things that have a spiritual nature. I was having a conversation with my mom the other night, and I was just saying to her, like, as my life has been shifting and changing over the last, 7 or 8 months, I'm doing my work as an internal alchemical, psychological, whatever detective, trying to find all the bits and pieces that I can to try and put the story together as best as I can in investigating myself, right? Because no one is going to investigate me as intently as I'm going to. So ultimately, the responsibility falls upon myself to do this, and I am doing that. And I said, but this to me is the spiritual path. You can also say it's the psychological path. You can also say it's the alchemical path. You can also say it's the path of awareness. Whatever you want to call it. To me, this is the spiritual path, right? The one of self-observation, and then the ways to connect it to other teachings, the things that give you meaning, how you can pull definite, not definitions, but I guess answers from this sort of the variables that you're given. That's the spiritual life. So spirituality with the twist really is looking at life, period, from different perspectives or different teachings, whatever it is that, and we're coming from the kind of Buddhist, Taoist, tantric, shamanic world because that's what we're influenced by. We try and pull meaning from the experiences that we have that don't have any inherent meaning. It's what you assign to them, what you ascribe to them. So then we try and ascribe meaning based on the things that we've read, the experiences that we've had, the teachings that we've received, things like this. So when we were talking about this earlier, when did things start to kind of fade a little bit? And and he said the 2000s. I was like, that makes sense. Well, why is that? Because there's a natural cycle to things. Things kind of go in 20 or 30 year cycles, And if I can say, and this is just coming to me now, so beautiful. Um, if we can say that, like I'm only going to talk about the U.S. because I don't have the other all aspects of the global kind of recent history at the forefront of my mind, and we didn't research this episode, so apologies if I get something wrong, but I'm only apologizing to myself, not to anybody else. Um, that the beginning of the sort of spiritual renaissance or the spiritual awakening in this country was started probably in the 50s. Why? LSD.
Mm.
And
You
then
said
what?
that the 50s or the 60s?
Well, the late 50s, early 60s.
Okay, you're talking about like in the actual historical timeline, it was already getting popular
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that time, and it hit its build over into the 60s. Okay.
Yeah, and then that went, and then the 60s happened, then you have all the counterculture stuff, right? Flower Children and the protests and free love and all that. And then that went and that kept going, right? Because it followed the kind of Vietnam War and then tailed off, right? And as a child or there's some things I just can't talk about in public ever, but as somebody who knew somebody very well who worked in the spiritual community as a medium in the 80s, it was
Mhm.
alive, and that's in Chicago. And this is a progressive area, but it's not like Uber. We're not like California. We're not like the Bay
Yeah,
Area,
that's
you
true.
know. And I feel like that vibe that began to grow in, like, we'll just say it in 1960, maybe that's
Mhm.
a little bit early, a little bit late, whatever. That vibe then grew, and then you had later on the war on drugs, Nixon, everything else. That's kind of, dampened it. Now, those who are listening are going to say, "Oh, Daniel, it sounds like you are correlating psychedelics and spirituality." And I could say, I am correlating those two things. I am not, they're not, it's not causation. Do you know what
Okay.
I'm saying? Why? Well, because you had the Chinese invasion and ethnic cleansing. Oh yeah, I said it. Suck it if you don't like it, of
Yeah.
Tibet, you know? And so then you had all of those, and that was what, I don't know what year was that, 59 or
50s. Yeah. Right.
yeah. And so then those teachers came to the US, and now you have people who are interested in this because it's a counterculture thing. And so then they had all these centers that were set up, and good for them. I mean, it helped and helps lots of people. So then you have this kind of newness and people are being drawn to it, and that's just part of the culture. But then everything has the shine wears off of everything. Nothing is new forever. And so that kind of cycle, then I'd imagine 40, 50 years, 40 years, then starts to die off because there's not another influx of I
Of
guess, like,
newness to kind of support it, you mean?
yeah, exactly. And so when he said in the aughts, the 2000s, I was like, okay, well, what was happening at the time? Well, we were, fresh off the kind of, like, I don't know, I felt like, for me personally, and I could be misled by this, so I want to hear what you have to think about it or say about it. I feel like at that point we were moving more and more towards a digital age. The digital age was beginning to build. You had the dot-com stuff in the 90s, then the bust, but people already going online. And yes, that opens up means of communication and different things that you could learn, but it's also beginning to kind of like disperse people. And so, people are still gathering, but you understand what I'm saying. It's like the ice is beginning to splinter a little bit, right? And then that only grows during the 2000s, and then we all of a sudden we enter the life of cell phone, you know, and now it's all kind of spread out again. And I don't know where we are, and I am genuinely curious to where you think we are. Let me ask you, where do you think we are now in the Lord's year 2025?
In terms of like the status of spirituality in the culture.
Yes, yes,
Like when we had Robert Thurman on, right? Shout out to previous episode, right?
yeah, yes,
We can call him friend of the show.
definitely. Yeah, he's a
He's
homie.
friend of the show. Uma Thurman's dad and great Buddhist scholar. All I could do was flash back to like kind of my experiences because I'm a Gen Xer, right?
Yep,
So for me, it was like if I remember like around the 90s when I was sort of in that window of time where you're sort of becoming more who you are, right?
sure.
Personality starts to form. You get out of
Yeah,
your teens and your 20s, you're starting to become really kind of who you are then, right? And I was a searching person, I was a seeking person, but it was like there was a fair amount of just like vibe in the air of these kinds of things. So to express an interest in Zen, I mean, I don't know, there was this old movie Before Sunrise. It had like a young Ethan Hawke in it and this really beautiful French actress, Julie Delpy. And like they're talking about all this spiritual shit. It's a kind of a story where two people meet on a train in Europe and they just kind of follow the kind of blossoming of their relationship. It's kind of beautiful if you like that kind of thing. And I do. So I was like watching that and it has a kind of like it's what was our word for it? Sapiosexual.
There we go. Yeah, demisexual.
There's emotional shit and there's intellectual shit and they're bonding and it's just watching them bond and flirt and I don't know, I thought it was really a beautiful movie.
Yeah,
And so anyways, he's talking about Zen shit, and I was like, though they were about the same age as me at that time. And I was like, yeah, that was kind of like in the air, and you'd go through and you'd walk into the bookstores that existed back then because there were just more of them and there'd be Zen
yeah.
books and Kabbalah books. And, it was like felt like a very electric kind of time for spiritual stuff.
Mm,
And if I'm totally honest, I don't feel that electricity anymore. I'm a different age and my life has gone on and I have my spiritual practice, so I'm doing stuff. And in some ways there's accessibility, which is
mm-hmm,
kind of great. Even
mm-hmm,
what we're doing here creates an accessibility. But there was
mm-hmm.
more of a crackle. I keep kind of trying to make this motion with my fingers,
Yeah.
a little mudra or something, but there was a crackle in the air. There was a something in the air, right? And I don't know if I feel that now. I think like when I look at like my daughter being 22, so the same age range as I'm talking about myself
Yeah.
back then, there's a kind of a vague interest in things, you know. It was kind of cute. They were doing some tarot cards, and so she sent me like a picture of the reading. There's stuff that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But those things are always going on. There's always someone
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
some tarots, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel it. If I'm wrong, I'd like to know,
Yeah.
but I don't feel it. And then that's a question of if that's the case, then it's a little bit like what happened,
Right.
right? To change things. Now Ryan brought came to the same thing. He thought like really materialism kind of took over.
Okay.
So his take was that there was an explosion of this materialistic thinking, and it kind of just swept through. And maybe people felt a pressure about it. Again, we're slightly different age ranges, not huge, but a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if that speaks to you as someone who had been more from that millennial space than maybe like people like Ryan and I who are a little bit more in the Gen X space or something, right? But there was sort of a pressure, like materialistic pressure on people or something was part of it. Does that seem true to you?
So I have a kind of a couple minds on it, right? One, I'm going to go back to the psychedelic piece,
Mhm.
right? So marijuana is legal in many states at this point where I definitely have friends who were sent to jail for it, a long
Yeah,
time ago, right? Which sounds strange now. I mean, it sounded strange then, but that was the land, the law of the land, you
yeah, yeah.
know? And then you have tons of people talking about their psychedelic, their DMT and mushroom experiences, all over the place, right? I mean, Joe Rogan mentions, and I'm not necessarily a fan of his anymore, but back in the day, for sure, when he was high all the time doing his episodes out of the garage and, whatever,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Old
you
school
know,
Joe.
yeah,
Mhm.
old Joe Rogan was cool. Like, now actual older Joe Rogan is not. There's a difference. But
That's the weird story.
right, but
Like what
he
happened?
He's talked
right?
about it a lot. Tons of people talked about their psychedelic experience. You have one, I mean, he's kind of a nemesis, Aaron Rodgers, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but he's talked about retreats in the dark and his ayahuasca experiences and all these things, that is public knowledge. It's kind of out there. So you have this part, and that to me is, spiritual adjacent, right?
Mhm.
It's not, it is a spiritual practice, depending on what context it's coming from. If it's held within I don't want to poo-poo on anybody's, views on it, but I think it's correlated. Again, not causative. So I think that level is increased,
Can I
right?
say one thing about that, Daniel, before you move
Sure.
on?
Yeah.
Gears. I was thinking about this during the week too. I mean, I think about our conversations to be, what we're going to be talking about, and I just think about the stuff that we care about. So I buy the fact that the psychedelics are useful as like door opening things for people. I completely buy that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when we did our episodes, we did one on psychedelics back in the day, and we've done other ones along the
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
We
for
talked
sure.
about this as honestly as we could, and we
Yeah.
tried to say, okay, like I had, my LSD experience, which was like really important for me. It did kind of open up something in me, right? Or it was in the time period where I was opening up. So I buy it. And I also buy like you, and we've had on Remy,
Yeah. Remy
right?
and Ashley. Yeah, for
And
sure.
Ashley, right? These
Yeah.
are people who are like, this has become part of their path.
Yes.
But just as a statistical thing, I have to say that a lot of people at this point have done a lot of different drugs, and I can't say that that's translated into like
Correct.
spiritual revolution. So it's a good
Correct.
feature, not shitting on anybody's cornflakes with it at all. I get it, right?
Yeah.
And for me too. Like so, two thumbs
Yeah.
up, awesome. But if I look at it objectively, well, it hasn't opened the gate
Correct.
to the so anyways.
Well,
Good that
this,
it's more accepted, good that people get to talk about it, good that more people can share and experience whatever they want to experience within that. But also to be honest, in the sense like it's part of a picture, but it can't be the whole thing, right?
right. So
Yeah.
yes. So that raises, and we've talked about this before, but just to touch on it for just 20 seconds here, that raises the question of incremental change versus fundamental change.
Yeah.
And you need both. In order to have fundamental change, you do kind of need the incremental change. And the
Yeah.
incremental change is not sexy. It's not sexy, you know?
Yeah.
But the psychedelics give the opportunity for a fundamental change in a very short time. However, that's rare when you could just hit that switch and now you're different. It's more common to build. And then at some point when you're not paying attention, you have that moment of Satori. You have this moment of opening, like when Neil Thies was on and he said he was asking this question: what is a body? What are cells? What are cells? What is a body? Boom, boom, back and forth. And then he's
Yeah.
sitting down and he's meditating and he's watching the incense stick turn into smoke. And where does the smoke start and the incense stick stop? Wherever
Yeah.
that is, that's the cells and that's the body. And that was his moment. That was his opening moment. And so yeah, so we're on the same page. So that's incremental fundamental change. So we're on the same page in terms of the psychedelic portion. I guess what we have to do then is we
Just real
probably,
quick, not to interrupt your flow, but like I can get that the psychedelics can blow your doors open in a way
yes.
like transformative. I'm not denying that at all.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
So
see the
then
yeah.
So then we have two questions really that are to my mind. One, what is spirituality? And two, what would you consider what would you consider an acceptable presence, or not an acceptable presence, but a presence that would correlate to, or be relative to a previous time when you felt like it had a larger identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I mean, like a kind of huge questions, I guess. What
Yeah.
spirituality? Let's maybe come back to that one. If I get what you're kind of talking about in the second one, it's kind of like the way I'm hearing that, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but it's kind of like, how do I get the gauges of how this feels different now from before?
Yes.
What I can say, and this is weird to think about, but you could go into a place like a bookstore and they would have books about Zen like everywhere, like in the fucking front, and it would all be front loaded. And it's a strange thing to think about that now. Because if you go into places where these materials may or may not be accessible, it's usually like stuffed in the back,
And
you
self-help.
know? And there's like under self-help and there's like a shelf and a half,
Yeah.
So I mean, I have that as kind of a gauge in my mind. It's just one thing. But there was some kind of energy around this for whatever the reasons was. And I don't want to be also the dude saying, back when I was younger,
Get off my lawn.
yeah, that's like obviously crap. So I'm not trying to say that. I'm more like looking at it as someone who cares a lot about this
Sure.
part of life. I mean, if it is different, then like what happened, to make it for people, we all need it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what made it, if it's like more on the back shelves now, like what happened, right? And just like, what are the reasons why, you know?
Mm.
So I mean, the what is spirituality thing, maybe I'll play with this a little bit more and then maybe we try to do something with that.
Sure.
But like, as far as like factors that might have been around it, part of it came up was materialism.
Okay.
And part of it was whether or not I brought this up with Bob Thurman back in the day too, whether or not it was sort of like new atheism. That
Mm.
what happened was there was an explosion that seemed to come out of nowhere, like in the aughts. If you can flash back to that time, it just depends how old you are listening to this and kind of
Yeah.
where your space was. But there was this whole explosion of like, even like a kind of a philosophy of like anti-spirituality that appeared.
Yeah. I mean,
It
that's
was sort of
growing.
like,
That's been growing since then.
yeah, and this was sort of a thing that like popped out.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, someone who was interested in Zen and these spiritual traditions, and like my life was transformed by these things.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, oh, it's a cool thing to think about. Like it took my life, which was, there were things I was wrestling with and struggling with, and it just transformed me. It transformed my whole existence. So
Yeah.
part of what we're talking about here is like, other people getting the chance to have those same experiences.
Yeah.
Shit's buried on the back shelf. You just don't get the chance to like get that stuff.
Right.
I mean, I bought like Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind in the fucking train station. It was just on the shelf, like that shit. It's just not happening. So I feel like a kind of a compassion and empathy for people who would need this, where it's like, again, like hidden away. And I don't know what happened with that. There was this explosion of this sort of like, it was kind of going after the big three religions,
Mm.
right? So they were kind of going after them, probably in the United States in the aftermath of 9/11, right? That had a big impact on people because people got freaked out about Islam, right?
Yep. For sure.
People lost their shit.
Yep.
And out of that thing grew this very strange movement of like, that was sort of like anti-spirituality.
Yeah.
And we talk about biological stuff. Ryan and I were mentioning this too. I mean, it's fine. We did the whole thing on the default mode network
Correct.
back in the day. We'll talk about neuroscience. We'll talk about things that are important for understanding ourselves and ways to grow and progress.
Yes.
So we're not anti that. But there was this whole thing where it was just against that, and it was really hardcore, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you held any beliefs that were, not like your absolute scientific materialist thing, you were some kind of woohoo, kind of flaky person, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that was a factor too, but
I think
that
so,
took off
Eric.
in that time. It like something weird happened, and all the cool spiritual stuff that might have been alternative spiritualities got kind of whatever. Anyways, I'm sorry I didn't mean to cut.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, and just from like a large cultural perspective, that was the first time since probably the Vietnam War that people felt on the whole very against, I think, something, and they're like, oh, we're being lied to.
Mm,
Iraq has nothing to do with this. And then people saw that there was a concerted effort by the Pentagon and others to put people on TV and say, oh, they have this, they have that, we have to go in. And people are like, no, this is bullshit. That's not true. And then after 9/11, you had all the conspiracy theories, and then, of course, blaming religion. And, so like, I think culturally there was a lot of pushback, to what was being told at that time. And so that makes sense. And there's not as much, there was a lot more information as once the internet opened, really, and the internet was open at that point, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
there was YouTube and there was everything. So you can people were able to kind of start doing their own things. And of course, it opens opportunities for people to learn different things that they would not have been able to expose to previously, but then it also gives, it's a wider net, and with, nets can catch things, but there's also holes that you could slip through and, become a conspiracy person if that, is your fancy, and that's not necessarily going to bring you back towards, what we would consider the divine. But, going back to episodes that we have done, I think what it was called, What Even Is Spirituality? We probably did that maybe a month or two ago, and we
Oh,
talked about what is, spirituality. So, but that's the second question. The question that I asked earlier that, I want to give mine to is what do I think about today is, what is this, the question we asked in the beginning, what is the status of spirituality in our current culture? And I would say it's probably not as strong as it once was in, 60s, 70s, 80s even, and I think part of that is to exactly what you had brought up and what we had just talked about was the influence probably in like the late 90s and 2000s from the cultural stuff, the internet things, all of the kind of spreading out of society a little bit more, if we want to use the right-wing term globalization. That's the Alex Jones term, the globalists, um so there was this.
5 years. It's the first time I've heard you do about Alex Jones
Well,
on this
but
podcast.
busted
Oh, you
out
need to
once in
start
a
selling some supplements
the
and
globalist, right? Yeah.
I don't want
Um,
to okay, can I like do one follow up? I don't want to kill your flow on
Go
it, but
ahead.
it's interesting to me. Like, so within your time, like if you look at like 2000 to now in the context of your life, what do you think the up and down has been of interest in these spiritual topics? Do you feel like it's kind of changed? Because we're talking about a 2 decade window or something, right?
Yeah,
And
I
you've been in it
can't
for a
really give
while.
a great answer, Eric, because I've been in it pretty much
Yeah.
since like 2006. That's what
Yeah.
I look for that. So when I go in a bookstore, I only know the self-help section
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's the only place where they have books that I want to read. I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, what a big waste to store here. I just want this one little section. You know what I'm saying? And so then I just choose from what they have there. I don't know what it's like before that. So I don't
Mm.
have that frame of reference. But what I can say is that what is present online from my perspective, again, from the way that the algorithm is grown and showing me things, is that I believe there is a lot more like, we call it quote unquote spiritual practitioners. And I don't mean that in like a pejorative sense by any stretch of the mean. I just mean it's a vast, large number of people, a larger number of people than it was previously, right?
Mm.
So there's plenty of people who do Reiki and tarot cards reading and Akashic records and singing bowls and sound healers and whatever, all these different types of things. There's a lot more of this. And again, how quote unquote spirit, I don't know why I keep doing that, but how spiritual is this? Would you say? I'm not sure, but those people definitely take it as their spiritual practice. That's how they connect with source. That's how they connect with their divine methods of inspiration. You know what I'm saying? So I can't, it's maybe not formalized in a tradition that you can say goes back how many generations or they have these particular steps or whatever, like how Buddhism has. However, this is that's their purview of reality and their purview of spirituality. And I could say there's a lot more of these people now than before, that are offering their services to the world. So I can say that is an increase. And now the other question is like, is it in the culture? No, and we'll go back to the episode that we did, What Even Is Spirituality, but it's never been. It never really has been that popular in the cult. It's not a cultural thing. So while you and I are here and hearkening back to our conversation that we had before we started recording today, because newsflash, we talk before we record. Not that anybody cares, but I'm just telling you. This is a labor of love for us. So like, comment, subscribe, share our work, hit the email and send us a message, show us some love. We definitely appreciate it. Gin and Tantra at gmail.com. We're on Instagram, you know what I'm saying? Gin and Tantra podcast. We try to do our thing a little bit. This is what we do, and we find this to be immensely beneficial in our life,
Mhm.
and therefore it would make sense to us, and we could be wrong, and we're probably biased, that it should have value for other people because it's not specific to anyone. The message that we have on here is not pro Republican. It's not pro Democrat. It's pro union, and not teachers union or labor union. It's pro union of the separation of those two sides, because ultimately that people want pretty much the same things. So what we're trying to do is help people work together within the various aspects of themselves and weave that together to form a synthetic person. And then you go larger to form a synthetic family, to form a synthetic community, to form a synthetic society. Not one that's homogenous where everybody has the same ideas. No, that's not possible. But at least you can agree on like human decency, and but you have to start by being a decent human in the first place. And so to me, as we sort of like transition here in the last few minutes of our conversation, that is spirituality in my mind, you know, is kind of like, I don't want to say perfecting yourself, because that I don't want perfectionism to be an issue in someone's mind, but you're polished. It's an act of polishing who you are, on a regular basis, while simultaneously accepting you for all the bumps and bruises and faults and flaws and perfections and beautiful parts and artistic creativity and all the things that are right with us, as well as all the things that are wrong with us. That's you. And then also saying, yeah, but I can work on that shit too. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm awesome and I'm fucked up and I'm still going to work on it because that's my goal. And that goal is not going to wax and wane based on the day. Actually, I accelerate knowing that I have less time here. To me, this is the kind of spiritual existence that I espouse, that we espouse, if I can say. And this is kind of how I see it.
Well, after something like that, this might seem like a little bit of like a doubling back or something, because you just
Sure.
give beautiful longer version of your vision, right? Okay.
Hmm.
But I wonder, part of what we hit on was the idea like things go up and down within a culture
Yeah.
at different times. And you kind of brought that up in the very beginning. And I thought about this question. We're in the midst of like chipping away at our little book, and it's something that I include in the intro, which is that we started this thing like during the pandemic,
Yes.
right? And that's another one of these things, like a 9/11,
Yeah.
right? Shook people's shit up, right? And people got really, that was like it's one of those things you're never going to forget,
Correct.
for any of us. And there was kind of a feeling, again, maybe a little bit there too. And I'm just thinking of individual people I know whose life stories are flashing through my mind.
Yeah.
People began to feel like shaken by that. There was a lot of death,
Yes.
right? It was scary. There was a lot of illness. It wasn't
Yeah.
obvious where going to go. And it led to a lot of like existential inquiry.
Mm.
And there was that window of time where people got a little shaken. And sometimes that can be good for spiritual stuff, right? You get a little
Hmm.
shaken, and it like it forces you up. I ding the camera. It forces you to sort of think about these things, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe that was a little bit where there was a weird kind of crackling energy around that time
Yeah.
for a lot of people. And remember back, like everyone was going to quit their jobs and go find themselves.
Yeah. Right.
That didn't happen. So
No.
there is a rhythm to that, I suppose. And then things like we're looking at where we're at now, a lot of the stuff kind of went back to a bizarre kind of status quo,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And people kind of like ricocheted back, I suppose, to something much more conservative, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because we're living in this kind of like what people are trying to describe as this conservative renaissance or something.
Oh, boy.
But still only like half the people
Or
who
less.
or less who care about this
Right.
decided to support it.
Uh-huh.
But like, it's a funny rhythm then if you're talking about a rhythm.
Yeah.
I guess it's like a question of if we get to the individual level of this,
Yeah.
like if you can go through a window of time like that in your life, can you like hold on to that,
Yeah.
not lose that feeling, that you can kind of like get a little bit shaken up and get questioning. And then as the world starts to go back more to like a status quo, well, that you don't lose it.
Hmm.
You hold on to it, right?
Hmm.
And that might be what's difficult on some level when you start talking about these rhythms up and down. It's kind of like
Yeah.
the classic story of the baby boomers who become like the Reaganite people later on, I don't know how true that story is, but it's hard to hold on to that, right? And
Yeah.
then part of it is like the ability to hold on. So you don't just sort of like, what is it? You become a like you get a little bit interested for a little bit, you kind of dilettante around a little bit, and then things fade away for you.
Yeah.
Right. Because you lose that sense of like
Yeah.
that shot that you had when, the truth of that, the earnestness and the urgency hit you. It kind of like fades
Yeah.
away. Right. I mean, that happens in the cultural rhythm too.
Yeah. It's a resiliency.
Yeah. For me, like in the spirituality thing, all I can kind of say is like, I think it's a composite of like multiple ways that you try to understand yourself, understand
Mhm.
the world around you, and then develop yourself forward. And I guess the vision that I have for this is that we're bringing in all these different tools for people that are ones of our own experience. So I try to be as personal as possible with these things.
Yeah.
So for me, it probably started with like I had my own like stuff growing up, but it was like physics was consciousness expanding for me.
Yes.
Psychology was consciousness expanding for me.
Yes.
Did some acid, that was consciousness expanding
Right.
for me,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Got, oh, this Zen shit's cool. That expanded my consciousness. That got a little bit more into a tradition that had more theory and trajectory to it
Hmm.
of how to develop a person, right? But the psychology I like too was the one that was very transformative, right? It had to do
Hmm.
with like really finding out who you are and a kind of like one of the words we love, authenticity.
Yeah.
So that happened, and then it was sort of this thing of like going to the accomplishments of human beings who are trying to explore those same questions.
Yes.
What's the
Yes.
nature of the universe? What's the nature of a person? Is there a soul? What's the nature of that soul or spirit? How can you develop it if it exists?
Yeah.
It was sort of those kinds of things, and that's sort of, I guess, what I think of spirituality as being. And then realizing you're not the only people who have done this.
That's what I was just gonna
People
say.
before you have like asked these same questions, and we
Yeah.
could all be part of this dialogue.
Yep.
And then we could get to share it with new people who are come along. Like
And
my
I
son
think
and daughter.
that's the thing right there, man. Is like when you find yourself having questions that other people have asked previous to you, and you can look at the results of their questioning and answering, it can help you with your own questioning. That's really the benefit of being in a sangha, in a community, right? Because that's contemporary, and probably other people in your community are asking similar questions. But then that's also the benefit in being in a tradition. Yeah, I'm not saying which tradition, I'm saying a tradition because others have asked the same, if not similar, questions before you, and you can look at the results of what their research has shown and then use that to further your own inquiry. But I think ultimately, what is the baseline of it all? It's the questioning, you know?
I love the word research in that too, because it implies that there's like stuff you can research. I
Yeah.
did like this gesture with my hands when you were talking that way because it's so beautiful. I feel the same way. That's obviously
Yeah.
that's why we do this thing together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we're part of I guess you could use the word lineage,
Sure. Yeah.
part of a lineage of people who are trying to ask these questions. And then I think what we're trying to do, when we were going to record this, you said we're going to be meta in this episode.
Yeah, for sure.
So, in doing this, it's like, well, we can learn something from like attachment theory, which is what we were supposed to be recording and we didn't. But, like attachment theory, you can learn something from, tantric Buddhists descriptions of how a person develops, spiritually. You can learn something from like the vision of the Kabbalists, which we haven't done yet even on this podcast, but will be
No.
done at some point, right? Their vision of how the cosmos works. You can learn
Right.
something from the Taoists, and you can learn something from even their medicine, how they build
Yeah.
things. So yeah, I think that's the idea. Now, is that dead? I don't know, but anyways, we're trying to do it,
We are trying to do it. We're we're
and
providing CPR,
as long as yes, mouth to mouth.
mouth to mouth to the
Yeah.
spirituality and the culture.
Pranayama, mouth to mouth.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of these things where and of course, we're in like kind of rarefied spaces where we meet people who do have passions around this too. We're lucky,
Yeah.
but I guess trying to get the message out to even more folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I think that's a good place to call it.
Yeah,
Um,
that seems about like what we wanted to talk about.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I think
exactly
we
it.
got
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, we did. We made it. We
Yeah.
made it.
did.
we got there.
Yeah.
Audience, we said it numerous times, but thank you so much for listening. We love to hear what people think, so leave a comment in the section wherever you're listening to, or feel free to hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com, or slide in our DMs at the Gin and Tantra podcast. I mean, we get some responses from people sometimes and other times we don't, but I'm genuinely curious. I'm not going to put up a poll because those polls don't ever give enough. We don't have enough responses to get a percentage as to what people think. But if you find this question, is spirituality dead, or what is the status of spirituality in our current culture? If this is something that you have thought about, or this has been thought provoking for you, please feel free, hit us up. I'm genuinely curious as to what people think. I know our audience is going to lean towards this. So, please feel free to share your thoughts. And if you want us to cover more of this or something else, then, we will be happy to do so as we've done in the past. We definitely take suggestions and, answer questions or whatever. So, please feel free to, show us some love. And for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.